She'll walk in as soon as we start. Watch. We're waiting for this little red light to go on back there. All right, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
I've asked Commissioner Wright to give a prayer thought, and she is running a tiny bit late, which is fine because I'm going to take this opportunity to hijack the agenda just for a brief moment. So it's an interesting day today. We are saying farewell to one of our commissioners, and we're welcoming 2 new commissioners. So let's start first with Commissioner Johnson. We're very sad to be losing you. This is your last official day.
Yeah.
You've provided 6 years of commendable, outstanding
Exciting
service.
Thank you.
I think that your viewpoints have been incredibly helpful on this commission, and you keep us on our toes,
Yeah.
including by teeing up motions that you'll then vote no on, which
That's
is
right.
always a surprise, Logan.
Yeah, well, you just got to we keep the process moving on.
So thank you very much for
Thank you.
all of your work on this commission, and you will be missed.
Thank you. I'll be back. Don't worry, you'll see me. But we may not be as friendly next time.
Thanks, Logan. All right, and then welcome officially to our 2 newest members. So we have Christina Wilcox and Mason. I always say your name wrong.
Care's good.
Care, yeah, every time I say it wrong, Mason. So welcome to both of you, and I just wanted to put you on the spot, give you 30 seconds to a minute to just tell us who you are and a little bit about yourself. So we'll start with you, Commissioner Wilcox.
Thank you. I'm Christina Wilcox. I grew up in Bountiful, graduated from Bountiful High. I graduated from the University of Utah with an accounting degree, and I worked for a little while as an accountant. Then I quit to raise my family, and my kids are all grown, and so I just figured I need to do something around here. I've lived in Centerville for almost 18 years, and my family is rooted here, and I just love the city, and that's about it.
Fantastic, welcome. All right, Commissioner Kiar.
K-Jar. Just
I
go K-Jar.
I know.
We got tons of cares in Centerville, too.
Kier.
So,
I'll get that one day.
my name is Mason Care. I've lived in Centerville for 4 years. I grew up in Bountiful, and I'm a Bountiful Brave, but don't hate me for that. You can probably hate me for being a lawyer, so that's fine. I work for the City of Layton as a city attorney, and I used to actually work with Shaylin and her firm. Before that, I was a school teacher. I taught for 7 years, math and physics, and I miss it every day just about. But I feel like I've finally landed where I'm at, and I really am appreciative that I have a chance to come here to serve. I also work on the Landmarks Commission with Mackenzie, so I'm looking forward to doing both of those for at least the near future.
Fantastic, welcome. All right, now I'm gonna put Becky on the spot. Sorry, Becky.
Hi, sorry.
We skipped your prayer or thought, and we can start with our commission business and come back.
Nope,
I know.
I'm ready
Need to
right now.
throw you right into it.
Sorry about the delay. I am so glad that we are very prompt here. It's very good. It's good for me because sometimes I am not. So, so can you just give me the 2-second version of both of you and tell me your first names and, a little bit about you, where you live?
Sure. Do you want to go again
I'll
first?
go first. I'm Christina Wilcox.
Christina.
I've lived here in Centerville for 17 years. I actually live just east of the new fire station, a couple houses
Great.
up. And
Good.
yeah.
And Mason Care. I've lived here for about 4 years.
And your dad was on the commission?
My uncle, actually, Scott
Uncle.
Care.
Okay.
Yeah. So my family has roots in Centerville.
Cool.
My grandparents moved here a long time ago. And my uncle stayed, and I've returned.
Fantastic.
Quick plug for Mason. I've seen him reel in the Layton City Planning Commission almost as good as Lisa reels us in. So it'll be good to have those 2 in tandem over there.
I don't know. I might want to go rogue someday.
You're wearing a different hat.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you a little bit about this day in history. Today, January 8th, 230 years ago, George Washington delivered the very first presidential State of the Union address to the nation, which I thought was kind of interesting. And one of the things that he talked about, he said, It was one of the shortest State of the Union addresses, and he expressed satisfaction with the cooperation in Congress in the pleasing, though arduous task of ensuring to our fellow citizens the blessings which they have a right to expect from a free, efficient, and equal government. That's not exactly what happens all of the time in government now. The cooperation in Congress and the pleasing ability to really work together. And I appreciate this commission and the fact that we don't always agree, but we have the ability to cooperate and to try to seek for common good among each other. So I appreciate each of you, and I hope that we'll continue to do that. And I'll say a quick legislative prayer. Heavenly Father, we're grateful for this day. We're thankful for our many blessings. We're thankful for this opportunity to serve and learn and share our time with one another. We pray that we will always seek the best for our city. We are grateful for our first responders, for those who serve in harm's way, and please bless them. We are thankful for thy hand in our lives, and pray that we might do good in all that we do. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you very much. Happy 2020, everyone. Let's start it off with our first item on the agenda, which is an administrative decision. We're being asked to consider a waiver of strict compliance with regard to landscaping for Dave's Complete Auto. So we'll turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair and members of the commission. Just a moment while I pull up some of the documents. Okay, just to recap for our new commissioners, Dave's Complete Auto is expanding their building. And as part of that, they're currently in between preliminary site plan amendment and final site plan amendment. And they will be taking a non-conformity request to the Board of Adjustments next week. But part of their application is a application for a waiver of strict compliance for landscaping. And the property is on Frontage Road, and this eastern half is the addition. So the application for waiver of strict compliance, they're asking to waive the 30-foot buffer between a commercial zone and a residential zone, because their east side and part of their south boundary borders against a residential medium. Actually, I think they're both residential medium zones. So for the waiver of strict compliance, there are a few things to determine and to review, and that's in Centerville Zoning Code 12-51-050, and there are 3 items to review. Does the waiver preserve the intent of this chapter and the provision for which a waiver is authorized? The granting of a waiver will not result in an adverse impact on surrounding properties, and the strict application of the provision in question is unreasonable or unnecessary for the specific use, design, or site proposal given the nature of the proposal or alternative measures proposed by the applicant, or the property has extraordinary or exceptional physical conditions that do not generally exist on nearby property in the same zone, and such conditions will not allow strict compliance with all the provisions of this chapter. So the site does have a few different conditions compared to its neighbors. As you can see on this site plan, the property line does jog, so they have more boundary line with residential zones than their neighbor to the south or to the north. So that does add a layer of complexity to their application. So staff, in this instance, recommends a reduction of the buffer to the medium intensity requirement of 15 feet instead of the high or very high intensity requirement of 30 feet, and they're in the commercial very high zone. So staff recommends this reduction instead of a complete waiver because staff finds that reducing, completely eliminating the waiver does not, I'll use the words, preserve the intent of this chapter for which the landscaping was written. But a reduction would enable them to work through the site difficulties better than following a strict compliance to that 30-foot landscaping buffer. In addition, staff finds in the code in 1251-070B1A, it lists that a buffer should consist of a wall or a barrier of at least 6 feet in addition to evergreen trees every 20 feet to provide noise and sound and smell site barriers in addition to just a wall. And so staff recommends that the trees remain as part of the buffering, but a limited distance of the buffer. Any questions?
One clarification from me with regards to the proposed motion.
Yes.
In number 4, it says a buffer of 15 shall be provided. I'm assuming
Oh.
that means 15 feet.
Yes.
Any other questions for staff? If not, we'll invite the applicant to step forward and speak to this matter. You'll just introduce yourself for us.
Thank you, everybody. Happy New Year. I'm Dave Bell. I'm the owner of the property. I'm also the owner of the property that borders I've owned it for 30 years. All the residential property that borders what we're talking about here. Commissioner Kerr, is you related to Mike Kerr, the old mayor?
No, actually.
Oh, okay.
Surprisingly.
You kind of look like him when he was young.
Cool.
That's a compliment.
I'll take it that way.
Okay.
I wasn't going to delve deeper.
But anyway, I appreciate staff's recommendation and their work on this. I know it's been we've been trying to get this through for a long time, and I do appreciate all the work everybody's done. I would ask, I've submitted the application and this drawing the architect has without the buffer, the landscape buffer, and I would actually, I'm a terrible singer. I'm a pretty good dancer. I can do a backflip. I really can do it. But I'll do just about anything if you need me to. But I'm really asking you to waive that 15, to waive the landscaping entirely in this. It's an impound yard, and there's an 8-foot high solid decorative. It looks like a rock wall. It's a rock wall, but it's solid concrete. And it's 8 foot high, that borders, the red line.
Pointer.
Yeah.
Right there.
Thank you. So there's an 8-foot high wall that goes all the way here, and I would, I know there's a statement made about for noise reduction. I don't know that, I have a decibel meter because I use them for noise levels inside cars and stuff. But sometimes we make statements and it's like we don't know that it's really true. So I'm not saying it's not true or whatever. But is really trees on the inside of this going to make it quieter? I don't know. But there's no drive-through here. See, they have an 8-foot buffer here, and this is older. They built this way after me, but they've got an 8-foot buffer here and a 6-foot high wall. And I'm okay with it because I own this and I own this. So I really don't have, I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of, I'm just asking you to waive it. It's an impound yard. Nobody's ever going to see it unless you're looking at Google Earth. Is there anything else, Miles? This is Miles, my son. He runs the place. Yeah. Is there anything else you can say, son?
It stays pretty quiet back there. Most cars we have come in.
If you want to speak, you're welcome to do it. If you'll just take a mic so that we can get you on record, and if you'll just introduce yourself as well.
My name is Miles Bell. I run our store. The work we do is mostly pretty quiet, and especially with the addition of the shop, the work will be it'll be even quieter back there. Most cars that come into us aren't running, so I don't know what kind of noise we're going to be making back there, and most of it will be contained within inside the store. And a car parked doesn't make too much noise either. So and we have the 8-foot tall concrete wall that's pretty nice looking in my opinion. So I think we're containing as much of it as possible is our goal. It's, we live there and we grew up there, so we like it to be nice. Right. That's all.
Okay.
I think that's it, yeah.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant?
Have you seen the recommendation that staff put in the staff report?
Yes.
And do you agree with that recommendation? Sorry, I wasn't clear.
No,
So
I
you're saying
don't.
number one, or yeah, what would you change in the recommendation? Or what is it you take issue with? if you
Just-
wouldn't mind?
Just get rid of the 15-foot barrier.
Number 4.
What page are
Oh,
you?
I see. Okay. This is
Yeah.
page 4 or 5 on that,
Yeah,
or 5 of 5 on your item?
5, yeah.
So 4, okay, 4 reads a 15-foot buffer shall be provided along the residential zone. I see.
Yeah,
I
I just,
assume number 3 as
Then you
well.
have to get rid of the trees.
Yeah.
I see, because they would go in that buffer zone.
Right.
Got it.
I'm just asking that, I don't see the efficacy of putting a 15-foot landscaping barrier inside an impound yard. I just don't see it, and especially with the parking problem. I'm giving up a lot of parking. And if you go there, you'll notice, and it doesn't show on the plan here, but I will show you, if you could bring that back up. It's right now I've left chain link up here. Now, as you all might be aware of, with this addition, because the side yard setback, I'm now set back 3 feet with the existing building. Next week I see Board of Adjustment. To see if because right now I gotta kick this wall 5 foot this way. And I'm really hoping that, that, I know it's not your concern, but, we're trying to get the building to just be the same north boundary side yard. So then this will be solid, and then I'll finish that 8-foot wall right here, where right now it's 6-foot high chain link. And then, right now, this will have the 8-foot high wall. We will put the 8-foot high wall here, because right now there's a chain link with a sliding gate right here, an automatic sliding gate. And that will be a solid gate with an 8-foot high wall here. And so you'll never see you'll never see anything. I really like, my customers like it, we do a lot of high-end vehicles, and people always go, do you have a place to leave my hot rod? And I say, yeah, they want it. They wish it was up. And that's why some of it we're doing the addition. A lot of times they're like, can I keep it inside? I'm like, I don't have a room. But at least I can tell them, it's locked, and of course there's cameras back there and stuff. So it's really secure. And the police will tell you, we ain't never had anything stolen. We don't have any theft there. Centerville is great. So,
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Any other questions for the applicant? Do you have?
Could I just ask, if the 15 feet were to go in, what would your parking stall situation count be?
Well, now, obviously we're not going to be able to jam cars back in there. So there won't be those cars. But we're going to be giving up. A parking stall is about 20, 25 foot deep.
20.
18. So basically, we're giving up all this.
It wouldn't just be pushed out?
Well, it would, but then then I give up one of my bay doors here. Because if we were to look at the elevation, these are deep bay doors.
Okay.
So if I push this out, I give up a bay.
And then on the southeastern boundary, if that's pushed up 15 feet, how does that impact the access choke point that's sort of kitty corner through the site? Do you know what I mean?
So south.
Southeast.
This is it here.
Right, that's the eastern is what I'm calling it. That's what call it
Right.
southeastern, yes.
Yes.
Does that not also?
Yes, it does. Yes.
So my question
So-
is, yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
So basically, where you see the parking stall lines is where the landscaping would be.
Right.
And so then the cars would be backed up, to that, yeah.
So have you done a count of how many stalls would remain afterwards?
It's on the, my architect wasn't able to make, he can answer that question, but, we've had a parking analysis. Corey, I know this isn't your job, but do you remember what the engineering study?
Is that study going to
We
assess?
Yeah, he did request, to set this back up, this is an addition to the site. This is an expansion of the site and encompassed additional property that was not part of the site. There is a parking count issue and a reduction request on the table and associated with that. And I think this is the balance of the landscaping waiver and how big does the expansion of the building get versus also the parking waiver request. And so you're taking all three of those, the building size, the parking need to support the building size, the landscaping waiver request, and all three of them are interrelated to drive what the final layout would be. So we'll see that when we come back to the final site plan.
Okay, so my questions are perhaps preemptive.
No, they're not, they're very related. You just didn't have a chance to see the conceptual being, which drove certain steps. One of them, look for a waiver, look for the Board of Adjustment, and so you're doing a balance between all of those things.
That's a good question, Commissioner.
I think it's 40-something stalls was the number.
Yeah.
Okay.
I gave the engineering firm that did this, Intellis Engineering, they're here in Bountiful. I have 25 years worth of data for car count, and it's computer data. We know how many, quote, our customers are steel. We don't deal with people really. The people just drop it off. So I know exactly how many cars I do every month, every season, every year. And we gave that to the engineers, and they did the calculations with my employee, the additional employees I'm going to have and everything. And we provided those calculations. I don't have them here tonight.
Right. If I recall the actual numbers, the study said they only need 23. Our city engineer reviewed it, and they recommended between that 23 and 35. And then when you started counting the storage areas, the numbers were centering around 40 stalls or so.
So right now it says there's 49 with the layout right now.
Right.
And then one follow-up question. If we were to completely waive the strict requirement and this property were sold to another owner for a different use, they could, I just need to understand yes or no, they could potentially use actions on this property that might have otherwise needed that kind of buffer. Is that correct? This waiver would flow with the land.
Correct.
Okay.
It's not a use.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think we can talk about that in a second. Is there any other questions? Does anyone have any other questions for the applicant? Oh, if not, thank you very much. And any other questions for staff? And I'll start with my question. So I'm assuming that as you're looking at this issue, and it goes to Commissioner Kerr's question, his thought process here, right? We're looking at it, and I recognize that this applicant owns both the commercial property and the residential behind it, but that may not always be the case. And so as you're analyzing this issue, it's what if somebody purchases this property and uses it for a different use, and what if somebody purchases the residential behind it? We're trying to make sure that there is that buffer
Right.
consistent with the code.
Yes, that's correct, especially because the residential zones are residential medium and they can be more dense, which also allows a higher building height
Okay.
compared to single-family homes.
Well, and I think it's less about even just like whether he owns it or not, but it's just the fact that it is zoned, what it is zoned next to, this lot.
Yeah, our view of it, and again, when you're looking at these waivers, it becomes somewhat of a balance of what you're trying to accomplish in the waiver versus the site. Our standpoint is we're trying to balance the issue that they want to obviously maximize the building area of their property. Who wouldn't want to do that? But then we have to have the support of the parking stalls for the size of the building expansion. But at the same time, at that desire, we have to think about the buffer and the adjacent uses that are associated with it. So the waiver of strict compliance from our standpoint is not a waiver to eliminate. It's a waiver that if circumstances exist, we could we can alter that to meet the needs and necessities. You know, so to me, to eliminate it in sole argument of maximizing the building and the parking is not necessarily completely appropriate, because you have the adjacent residential. The adjacent residential, regardless of how it's owned, it'll eventually be developed. In this case, it's actually fairly narrow. So you're most likely going to see the access on the east side and all of the buildings on the west side. It doesn't have to be that way, but I've seen previous layouts and ideas in theory for the property, and that's a configuration that seems reasonable. Regardless of the configuration, though, think about the units now built onto that project. Our architectural buffer is twofold. It is a screen wall fence, and there's definitely a nice screen wall associated with this property. If you go see it, you can't really argue with that. You know, the argument is does the grass and the shrubs that are only going 3 feet high necessitate anything additional? Probably not. With the 8-foot wall. But if you think of the tree amount, the buffer is saying it's a wall and these trees. The trees are growing at an ornamental at a 25-foot height, you know, higher if it's a larger tree. The concept of the trees is also the visual. You've got an industrial building next to a residential area. These could be front yards or backyards of the residential units. It creates that visual buffer in addition to the noise and the aesthetic buffer to make the quality of the residential project not feel up next to and exactly against a commercial area. And so the buffer is those two components together. So our standpoint is that, you know, the building can be 8,500, it could be 8,000 square feet. If it's reduced a little bit, you can then manage the parking a little bit, and the reduction request is being balanced again, because we're not fully parking this project at this time. And then you could put the 15-foot buffer or a 12-foot buffer or whatever's adequate to establish the trees. We went to the half of the 30-foot buffer in their strict compliance, but sufficient area that you can back the building up a few feet in its proposed, so that you're not parking in front of the door. And you can still get some parking back there, and you can get the trees. And we're more looking at that from our standpoint than we are saying the shrubs have to be planted, where the Kentucky bluegrass is the buffer. And so waiver of strict compliance from our standpoint isn't the elimination. It's how can we better balance maximizing use of the property, but yet keep it parked correctly and buffer to the residential. So elimination doesn't fit our bill of recommending.
Corey, when you guys made the recommendation to go with the 15-foot, is 15-foot because that's how much space you need in order to reasonably grow the type of trees that you're talking about? I'm wondering if we were to reduce it to, say, 10 feet, would 10 feet provide enough space to grow the type of trees that we're talking about?
Well, we have a tree expert here, so I'll let you address that. But the 15-foot, from my perspective, was driven off the concept plan that showed the ability to pull the parking away from the property line still and still be able to park and not be in front of the doors.
Okay.
So,
Do you know the answer to that question?
but the
So,
tree expert.
I'm an
Oh,
arborist.
you're the arborist. I was like, you always talk about trees, man.
I do like trees, but I'm not the expert. I thought they were
thought-
looking
no,
this way. I
my
was like, oh.
apologies,
No,
Mackenzie.
you're okay.
I thought Corey was talking about Becky. Becky is always, sorry. I think of you as our tree
So,
aficionado.
I speak for the
yeah,
trees.
she speaks for the
Speak for the
trees.
trees.
Yes.
Yeah, it's okay. So we went with the 15 partly because it's already an option in the code for a different zone. But yeah, it could be reduced. 12 feet is probably reasonable. 10 feet is probably also reasonable. I would say anything less than 10 feet for it, because in the code does require evergreen trees. And we know how evergreen trees do in Centerville without some support. So I would say anything less than 10 wouldn't be sufficient for the trees required.
Okay.
Is there a requirement on the caliper that has to be installed?
2 inches the minimum caliper of any tree when it's planted initially.
Any other questions for staff? Further discussion or debate?
Yeah, I'll start. So in my mind, I kind of think about this in balancing two things, balancing the parking situation and balancing the landscaping. For me, I feel like I'm less inclined to grant a waiver for the parking than I am for the landscaping. Partly because what is one of the things that we seem to talk about all the time here on this commission? It's parking. We talk about parking.
Parking waivers.
We're doing parking all the time. And so for me, I feel like this is an opportunity to say, you know, we need to maximize the number of parking stalls, because who knows what's going to happen now, but maybe, I don't know, maybe Miles decides he doesn't want to run the business anymore and this property changes type or changes use, and heaven forbid you put a dance studio in there and you've got 75 cars waiting to get in and out or whatever else. But parking seems to be an issue. That's what I'm saying, and this is parking is an issue. So I'm inclined to grant a waiver for landscaping and kind of say, then we're going to ask for a few more parking stalls because that seems to be an issue in the city. The other thought that I had along these lines as well is, as far as buffering goes, you know, the residential stuff isn't developed yet, and there's always the opportunity, even if it is a residential medium, you're going to put 2 stories in there along that east side there. You know, the residential development could plant some trees that would act as a buffer there as well, and that seems to be a better place for a buffer trees is on the residential side of the wall, not on the commercial side of the wall. You know, the wall, it's an 8-foot wall, which is a nice big wall. It's a good sized wall. So I feel like that, you know, we maybe don't necessarily have to take care of all of this right now. Like I said, I'm inclined to do the waiver for landscaping instead of for parking.
So you would say strike 4.
Strike 3 and 4 with the understanding that
The teeth are coming back when it comes to parking.
the parking is going to be a thing. So we're going to try and maximize parking instead of landscaping.
I appreciate your thoughts on trying to figure out how to balance some of these competing needs. In my mind, part of the reason why we have these competing needs is because we have a really, really big building on that lot. And sometimes, I mean, trying to maximize the space for the building is great. I want to support landowners utilizing their land and being able to maximize their space for sure. I would actually probably disagree with you on the parking. I mean, if they did a parking study that said, you know, 23 stalls, and then the city came back and said 23.2 something, that's still a lot less than the current 49 stalls that are there. The other thing that I also want to mention is buffering should be the responsibility of the egregious party, right? So if the buffering needs to occur, it should be the people that are creating that situation, I believe. And I don't think it's harmonious with residential property to expand and then just totally throw out this option of this landscaping. I think we could find a really good compromise, like was mentioned, you know, maybe a 10-foot buffer that would still prevent, you know, completely doing away with it, but also would allow some trees to be planted there, allow sort of a compromise, and not be so strict on having 50 stalls when really that's maybe much more than what is needed. I don't want to underpark, but I will point out that if I'm correct, Lisa can correct me if I'm wrong, but Centerville City has a higher parking requirement than our neighbors, Bountiful, per square footage. Is that correct? I think we decided it was like 5 per.
Of office, for office use.
For office
We're more
use.
aggressive with our office than most ordinances.
So not this would apply in this situation?
Correct.
Okay.
Now, to be fair, with the parking study pointed out, you know, the standard of parking in this is is not distinguishing the different types of automobile uses and so forth either. And that was part of the argument during the conceptual.
Right.
And why they said that this particular auto use, it only needs the 23.
It's less.
Rather than the city's generalized standard of 4 per thousand, which
Right.
is similar to retail.
Right.
So you could consider that the 4 per thousand might be, need a relook for individual types of uses.
Right. Well, and if it were, I mean,
But generally, I'd say 4 per thousand generally matches a lot of other cities.
okay. And if it were that, the parking that's existing on the land right now were closer to the low end of the scale of what our engineer recommended, in the 20s, then yeah, I probably wouldn't have the same argument. But the fact that it's up there at 49 and the range that we received from our city engineer started at 23 and went up, to me, it feels like, well, let's recognize that and also be able to make a good compromise for, a buffer.
So to that point, not this aerial photo, but on the Google Maps aerial photo, in that picture, around the perimeter of the property, there are 41 vehicles parked around the edge of the property. So there's clearly the capacity for that many vehicles as part of business and whatever else. And so that's part of the reason why I'm saying that I think parking is probably going to be a bigger pressing issue, because if you were to go, I don't agree with the 20-something number, and I don't even think that the 35 or whatever it was that the high end of the city engineer said was sufficient, because there's 41 in that picture.
Right.
And so, I can see that quickly becoming an issue.
But my question would be, why would a business owner whose livelihood depends on cars coming in or vehicles coming in express or promote the idea that 23 is the required amount if they really would need lots and lots and lots and lots more?
Yeah, that's a good question for maybe the applicant, but the point of it is my point of it is if you take 10 feet around the perimeter on that east and southeast corner and squeeze all of the parking in, you're going to lose parking stalls and you're going to lose parking space. Even if you double a lot of those up, you're going to lose that space. And then you're just going to create, problems. It's going to spill out who knows where.
Well, and that's where I think we kind of ran into the same situation at our last commission meeting, where I appreciate the best, highest, maximum use of, a CVH property, for sure. I think it's great that landowners are able to utilize their property, have the freedom to do so within, appropriate means and bounds. But I also think it's sometimes that we have these things set in place for a reason, so that we don't lose this aesthetic or this sound barrier, all of these reasonings. If we didn't have these things in place, then we would simply be a bunch of concrete floor and concrete buildings as big and as wide as we possibly could be. So to me, because we live in Centerville, that is not just a downtown area. It's an area that has, undeveloped residential medium property that backs next to this CVH zone and other things like that. We need to recognize and respect the buffering locations and say, okay, this is a tricky thing that the property owner is going to have to balance. I really want to maximize the biggest building on my property, which means I also have to recognize there might be some compromises that I'm going to have to make with that.
I want to weigh in here because I am empathetic to this property owner. I'm empathetic to the property owner and the desire to want to put up a building that better suits their needs. And I'm also empathetic to your argument, Kevin, that it makes sense to look at parking over aesthetic use. Here's my problem with both of those arguments, though. In order for us to grant a waiver, we are required to find that the granting of a waiver will not result in an adverse impact on surrounding properties. So if we conclude that it will result in an adverse impact, I don't think we can say we'll push that onto the property owner to build the trees. If we find that it will result in an adverse impact, then we cannot grant the waiver. And so if I believe that eliminating the waiver will result in an adverse impact, which I do, I don't think that I can vote in favor of it, which is why I was asking, what's the smallest amount that we could put the trees in, because that, I think, complies with the limitations that we have here to grant the waiver.
So that's a good point there on that number 2 on the conditions for the waiver. My kind of counter thought to that is, it does not say have an adverse impact on future use of surrounding properties, right? So as it is today, does it have an adverse impact on that property and its current use? I would say that it doesn't.
Well, what it's zoned, though.
But what it's zoned, that's true. But we're not trying to buffer an existing use on that property. So
I'm intrigued. Lisa, Mason? That's an interesting interpretational question. What do you think?
I think that the code is trying to protect an adverse impact on what it's zoned, not whether it has that use now. Because, I mean, if you have a 0-foot buffer, you could have a vehicle right there at the wall idling. And eventually that will, I mean, that's the intent of all of our zoning, is to buffer, and I believe all of our code buffers the zone, not whether there's a use there yet or not.
If I could weigh in on that one, think of it as a sliding scale. Let's suppose that the proposed waiver was for 29 feet instead of 30 feet. Would that have an adverse impact on neighboring property? Perhaps not, arguably. Well, what about if we go to 15 feet? Will that have an adverse impact, especially if we have the same kind of screening that would have existed at 30? Arguably not. So there is the potential that we could find that there is no adverse impact on the neighboring property, given that under the proposed tree requirements.
Hate to be rude and interrupt, but the recorder needs to pick up.
You need to be closer to your
Discussion.
thing. Pull it
Well,
up.
see, I've broken my mic.
Just yank it.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, no.
Nobody touch it.
It's just sit really tall.
Sorry. But do I need to repeat that, or are we good?
Well, you need to go back through that, or you good?
Okay. I guess the point being is that I'm not so sure that the strict interpretation means that if there's any adverse impact, that we can't make a finding, especially when we can make mitigating circumstances to then say that the impact is what it would have been in the first place.
Do you think that there is some adverse impact to the waiver?
To eliminating the waiver.
Yeah.
Eliminate
Well,
the
no,
buffer?
eliminate the buffer.
Eliminate
Yes,
the buffer
there
is what I
is,
mean.
because
Sorry.
I don't understand necessarily how the zoning and the requirements work. I guess this is all grandfathered, is that correct? Because it's property line right now. There's no buffer, and could we
because
understand the
Yeah,
history of why
we'll
it's
go
like
into
that?
history. If you see on this map right here, to the south of this Utah protrusion, for lack of a better description, this is a single-family home in the RM zone. The additional land used to be a part of that lot. And so the building and site were on that west property line of that home to the south. The applicant owned this property, was able to rezone a portion of it, leaving the house in the RM, and the back portion then was assimilated. So it's an addition and a new development from that perspective.
Okay, so, but more to the point of the question, this is an extension of an existing building.
Correct.
Right? And that would, I think, be considered an adverse impact on at the very least, sightlines for potential residential nearby. And that's why the noise and the smell perhaps isn't such a big issue, it's more the sightlines that would be a potential adverse impact. But think of it this way, 30 feet versus 15 feet with the same amount of trees either way, you're going to be able to obscure those same sightlines in the same degree of mitigation, which is allowed under the code.
I would agree with you that there's not a big difference between 30 and 15, but eliminating the trees altogether.
No, I
Certainly.
see a problem in
Yeah,
that direction.
it certainly does.
That's a bridge too far from what I understand from the legal analysis.
Yeah, I think that's where I'm coming down to, which is why I would look for making the smallest possible buffer that we could. But that's where I'm leaning right now. Any other discussion on this one? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
Chair, I make a motion for the Planning Commission to approve a waiver of the landscape requirements for Dave's Complete Auto Development located at 335 South Frontage Road, subject to following conditions 1 through 4 in the staff report, which includes the requirement of 13 trees and a 15-foot buffer, with suggested reasons for action, A through D in the staff report.
I have a motion. Anyone like to second that?
Yeah, I'll second the motion.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that we strike 3 and 4 from the existing motion
Okay.
of the suggested, or the conditions.
Amending the motion?
I would like to amend the motion to strike 3 and 4.
All right, so we have a motion to amend the current motion to strike numbers 3 and 4. So your proposal is to just allow it to go through without any buffering at all.
Yes.
Okay, that's the motion. Anyone want to second that?
Second.
Logan.
Logan?
Second.
I love you, my friend.
I appreciate
Okay.
the opportunity to,
Dude, I've been left hanging with motions before. I'm not going to do that.
And again, on this one, I would just kind of reiterate, I understand the points that you've made and the concerns that have been raised. I feel like, again, that parking is an issue, and I'd like to find the opportunity to maximize the parking while we can, and, not put a bunch of grass and stuff behind an 8-foot wall that nobody's going to see. So,
Kevin, I will say though, parking is an issue because they're making an addition.
well,
So this is an issue brought on
True.
without this addition, we would not be having this conversation. So parking is an issue because of what has been proposed today.
fair. That's fair.
Okay. Any further discussion or debate on the currently pending motion, which is to grant the waiver with no buffer requirements at all?
So maybe just a motion, just vote on the amendment
Yes.
first. So just that portion.
Okay, so that portion of it, which would effectively be
The motion to strike 3 and 4.
a motion to strike, there we go. Okay, so the motion is to strike 3 and 4, which would effectively make the underlying motion 1 to grant the waiver without any
Right.
buffer.
But then
Okay.
we'll just vote on that
Are
main motion.
are we all clear on this one? All right, we'll start down at your end. Commissioner Daly?
Aye.
Aye.
Nay.
Nay.
Aye.
Nay.
Okay, the motion fails,
Yep.
which means,
Because it tied.
Because
Because it tied.
it didn't get more than 50%.
yep. Okay, so now we have on the table the first motion, which is to grant the landscaping waiver as set forth in staff report with 1 through 4. So any further discussion or debate on this motion?
Yeah, I'll just talk really quickly. I know that we've sort of talked through this a lot. Again, we have to, like Shaylin spoke about, and like, what was your first name? I'm
Mason.
sorry. Mason. Mason's what I talked about. I'll get it, though. Mason talked about. This is an addition that's going to cause an adverse impact on the surrounding properties, whether they are currently being utilized at their highest and best in their zone, or whether they're just zoned that way. They are going to be affected in an adverse way. Because of that adverse impact, our city has established buffers to make sure that these impacts are less adverse. But I do think that in this situation, given the fact that we do need to recognize the use, recognize the need for parking, I think that we can, as a commission, look at the needs of the property owner, try to address needs while still mitigating some of these impacts, and come to a compromise that would allow the city to maintain some ability for mitigating the impacts, and a property owner to also try to utilize his property as best as he can. And so I think, you know, I would be open to an amendment on the motion to even change the buffer to 10 feet, you know, as was talked about with Mackenzie saying that would possibly still work with some trees, if anyone's interested in that. But I think we've got a good compromise here where we're balancing both competing interests.
I'm
Funny-
glad that you invited a
Funny you
motion.
should mention that, because Mackenzie and I have been talking about that over here.
Okay, well then let me go ahead and I am going to move
Okay.
to amend the motion so that point number 4 says that a buffer of 10 feet shall be provided along the residential zone, and we can debate this
I
further
se-
if someone wants to second it.
I wanted to second it.
Okay, Logan seconds. And now we can discuss the current motion to amend, and I'm going to ask you to talk about what you've been talking about with Mackenzie.
Basically, I was just asking if you can fit trees in there at that space, and she had said 12 to avoid damage to the paving.
Pavement.
Yeah, but we're not talking about sidewalk here. We're talking about
Asphalt.
parking, asphalt. So with the understanding that, you know, 12 would be really comfortable for pavement damage. 10 might be tight, but can be done. So that's what we're talking about. So
Okay.
10. That kind of helps to maximize, give a little bit more space for vehicles.
Agreed. And it seems like the property owner would take the risk if the 10 wasn't quite enough. And I do think that the visual impact to me is the adverse impact that I'm most worried about. So I like that compromise.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
About the certain species. I mean, are there certain species that should be that we maybe need to consider as part of our motion to help assist in this size? Since we're going down to 10, are there certain kinds that we should say you can't do these kinds?
Without studying this particular species, I don't feel safe saying,
Okay.
let's blanket certain species out of this list. But for the most part, evergreens do get wide, but they don't hang over. And so if you have enough width for the base of a tree, for, you know, the branches at the bottom, you should be okay. Trees, they will keep growing, so, I mean, it would be in their interest to either replace them if they get too large, or to trim them. But
Okay. All right, any further discussion on the current motion to amend? If not, we'll go ahead and take a roll call vote or start down at the other end this time. Commissioner Kier.
Aye.
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 Wow. All right. So now the current motion is on the table to approve the landscape waiver, amending number 4 to provide a 10 feet buffer along the residential zone. So with that motion currently being on the table, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote, starting with Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
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 All right. It passes. Thank you very much. I know that this probably wasn't exactly what you wanted, but
Oh, shoot.
Oh, sorry, I can come back, we can get to your site.
Sure, you guys are wonderful, everything's, thank you so much. But I was wondering, and I understand the protocol, I can't speak, but with that being said, if we open up, we see this my house here, this used to be the boys' backyard when we played baseball. So yeah, I took that out, and they grew up and now they're breeding and making their own families. But all this landscaping here, would it be considered, because what Kevin was saying is, this is already this is like, man, I'm telling you, I've owned this home for over 30 years. This is all 30-year-old landscape, that's a big old tree right there. Could we get rid of that 10 foot? I'm just saying, I don't want to aggravate anybody, because this is landscaped.
yeah,
And that ain't going anywhere.
My recommendation for you is to get with staff after this meeting, and you guys can talk about whether, you know, if there's anything else that you can do. Maybe you have to come back again, I don't know. But I would suggest, right now, the only thing that has been publicly noticed is the one that you had requested, so. Yeah, absolutely, but talk to staff. We have great staff.
Best of luck.
Yes, thank you very much. We appreciate you, Dave.
Thanks.
All right. Well, our two new commissioners got a rather unusual procedural introduction to motions. They're usually not quite so complicated,
That wasn't so
so.
bad. At least there wasn't
Welcome.
any public here yelling at us, so
That's true.
That wasn't bad.
I didn't even notice Lisa squirm. That was good.
Woo.
Logan didn't create any kind of weird motions right at the last minute, you know.
he didn't pull a Logan. I love this. Nay.
All right, moving right along. Item number 2. Okay, we have another administrative decision. This one, unlike the last one, has been scheduled for a public hearing. We have a conceptual site plan amendment to the decant station. Am I saying that right? Decant? Decant?
Decadent.
Whatever. 655 North, 1250 West. I'll turn the time over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Amon. Kevin, our engineer, I was told would be here tonight, but I'll just kind of cover it, and then you can see where you go from there. If you have questions that raise concern, you certainly have the option to table it, and we can have them come. Out west at 655 North, 1250 West is the Public Works Building and our offices, so if you come out our way to the west side of the tracks, we'll buy you a pop from the pop machine. That's about as decadent as we get. What's interesting about the site plan here is this was approved prior to even the current version of our zoning code. And as you recall, on our zoning code, any project that's in compliance with its original approval is considered in compliance with our new code, pending the legal nonconformities that exist. In this case, there is some site landscaping nonconformities. They're only at about 8%, and it's required to be 10%. On this side. So you know that we viewed it from that standpoint. What's applicable to a legal non-conforming site, and what do you review? So there are elements of the landscaping and so forth that we didn't address. The reasoning why we did not address that is according to the non-conforming provisions. We're not dealing with use here. We're not dealing with structure. We're dealing with other nonconformities. Other nonconformities is landscaping, parking, fencing, signs, some other things that are associated. Those are categorized as other nonconformities. And under that clause of other nonconformities, if you do not expand more than 30% of your site or more than 50% of the value of the premises, you do not have to bring up to those other nonconformities. So you'll see a good half of the report disappears from analysis due to that clause, because they're not over that percentage. Just by way of introduction, you have the Public Works Building here to the south. You have the plow trucks, just if you ever really want to know, sitting over by the Legacy right-of-way. Here's our salt sheds located in this white roof-looking structure. Here's our Parks and Rec building to the north of the Public Works. And you have an area that I've chosen the fancy word of underdeveloped. This area has never really been slated for structures and other elements. It's just an open area, dirt, gravel, and it's various miscellaneous stuff gets stored there. And so it's not been slated for some type of use. We do have our material storage here, our beautiful decadent material storage, Jersey barriers. This is our asphalt, fill dirt, gravel. When you have a pothole, this is where they're pulling it from and taking it out to your roads and filling it up. You have a water leak. If we have to ship it in through a third contractor, we do. So this is the underdeveloped site. And so we brought it back through this process because we wanted to say, look, this is affecting a site that didn't really clearly have anything slated for its use, and it was just best, rather than try to use it as administrative approval for the zoning administrator, the Development Review Committee, which is all the city staff, said, you know, let's run this through the Planning Commission. Let's do the conceptual, let's do the final so that we have a clean view of what was approved for the city. So the city, in a sense, trying to be a good neighbor. The decant station, it's a building that would be located, so I'll zoom in here a little closer. The decant station would be slated to be here. So this entrance functions where you would come in with the trucks. The purpose of it is, right now we have a wash area for the trucks. So all the dirt and the salts go into the wash area. They get in a little tiny capture basin, and then the storm drain flows out. And we have to frequently bring in a third-party vac truck and pull all the debris out. It's not adequate. It's insufficient for handling all the road salts, all the materials, the trucks and the washing of those vehicles. And with the new state guidelines and proving that you handle your materials and it's not going into the storm drain, the city's now taking the funding forward for this decant station so that it can be, shown we are adequately doing our part to keep the water clean, because we all live downstream, right? Rhymed. Bad rhyme, but I had to throw it in. So now I threw myself off. The decant station is not fully funded for a complete building. And so the proposal with the decant, you'll see in your construction drawings, is they'll pour all of the cement pad for a larger building, but only half of that pad would be enclosed by funding right now. And so the decant portion, the operation, would be on the west end of the building. The pad outside, you'd see a reorientation of these materials. And the pad outside, the wall is double reinforced, so a front end loader, like our salt sheds, can come in and pull the materials in and out. They'll relocate that, and when they can fund the other part of the structure, if it's funded, they would then put the additional roof on it. So they're asking for the whole thing. Just wanted you to know that only half of the structure is being built, but the entire pad area would be constructed. Basically, staff, unless you have specific questions, is supporting approval of the conceptual plan. I do reach out a little bit further, if you will, to the city. The area can be weedy and mud traveling around and the trucks coming in and out, and if they're using the decant station, there's an asphalt area and driveway they'll use, but if the trucks are now circulating through the muddy and the gravel area, again, that's to meet these your SWIP plans, your stormwater prevention pollution plans. We don't want trucks driving through the mud now and dragging back out onto this north street. And so I do reach a little further, confession to a standard that we'd like to see the remaining part of the property, how it's going to be managed from a weed and a mud standpoint. And I do that for twofold. One, we require other entities when they come in to address this issue. And secondly, I just think it's a good way to finish out managing this underdeveloped property until some other uses may be slated for it. So that's my conceptual recommendation to you. I talked to Randy, the Public Works Director, this afternoon. He mentioned that Kevin would be coming. Kevin's not here. So to date, on staff's recommendation, I did not hear any opposing viewpoints.
Thanks, Corey. Any questions for staff?
I just have a question about can you just describe further, so we're trying to address environmental concerns. Is that, am I reading?
The stormwater environmental concerns
Okay.
into the storm drain.
So we're still going to be discharging the exact same materials. We're managing them, I guess.
You'll still be using now a bigger facility with the catch basins to take the pollutants out and trap them so that when then the water will flow out underneath. They call them snouts, a fancy word. And the water now will be cleaned and can be dissipated back out to the stormwater system. And then over time, the materials are then vacuumed out with a vac truck and
Okay.
disposed of.
Okay.
And I don't know of any incident of Centerville going to a river basin with a vac truck like they did in Duchesne and just pumping it out into their stream.
And prior to that, they just have to go elsewhere to dispose.
Yeah, right now, if you go back to the Public Works, you won't see it here, but this is a wash bay where trucks get pulled in and washed. And that storm drain goes inside of the building. And so, what was it, about a week ago? Did you hear the vac truck? The vac truck pulls into here, into that catch basin, which is fairly small, and vacs out all the materials that are in there. It's just really small.
So this is just creating more efficiency, possibly better environmental
Better compliance.
and then ultimately utilization of this underdeveloped plot.
Right.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions for staff?
Yeah, Corey, so I'm guessing those 3 areas there to the north, that right there. No.
It's gravel park.
Those
and
Yeah, is that the
sand
Parks
landscape.
Department?
That's the
stuff?
parks
That's
material, the
moving?
mulches.
Yeah,
Yeah, because when this comes in,
yeah.
the orientation of the trucks, they plan on using it material storage here and turning it. And then if they can build the rest of the building, they will have it covered. It's the funding issue of covering those materials right now.
Okay, any other questions for staff? If not, we don't have an applicant, so this has been scheduled for a public hearing. We'll take the opportunity to open the public hearing and invite any member of the public who wishes to speak to step forward. Seeing no one here, we'll close the public hearing. Any other questions for staff, discussion or debate? If not, the chair will entertain a motion.
I hereby make a motion for the Planning Commission to accept the conceptual site plan for lot number 3 and partially on lot number 2 of the Centerville Corporate Park subdivision, provided that the applicant addresses the following with a future final site plan submittal, items 1, 2, and 3 in the staff report with suggested reason for action A.
Go ahead, Vic.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion or debate? If not, who did it first last time? Oh, we'll start here. Commissioner Daly.
Aye.
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 Motion passes. Thank you very much. Moving right along to item number 3 on our agenda. So we are going to be electing a new chair and vice chair of the Planning Commission. In prior years, we have opened up nominations for the chair and then accepted nominations, closed that, done a voting that Lisa will hand out papers, and we'll all do that by anonymous ballot. And I assume that we're going to be doing the same thing this year. So I would like to nominate Kevin Daly as chair, because I think that he has done a terrific job, and I would like to point out that when he has been chair, you guys have had really, really, really short meetings.
Wow.
That is actually quite,
No pressure, right?
that might sway me. I always say, and I said this last year, if it's not broke, don't fix it. I feel like we have a really good thing going right now with our chair and vice chair. So I would recommend or nominate Shaylin again, unless you like really don't want to. But I just feel like you do a good job, and I'm comfortable with it.
I agree. If it's not broken, don't fix it.
It is my last full year here on the commission.
Oh, see that'd be great.
So. All right, any other nominations? Anyone?
I move we close nominations.
Second.
Then in that case, I'll withdraw.
What? No, you
Yeah.
can't withdraw. No,
I can withdraw.
no. Is
Then
that
we can
allowed?
save ourselves the time of
Yeah.
having to go through and do all
Is
the
it allowed
legal-
for him to withdraw? Lisa?
She thinks it is.
Yeah.
See, that was a precursor to what the meetings could have been right there. That kind of
Right
quick,
there.
decisive action.
Kevin, that's true, that decisive action.
Okay, write it down. Does everybody have a pen?
Oh, you're gonna make us write it down?
I'm really
anyway?
gonna make you write it
Okay,
down.
Fine.
You're going to write down withdrawal?
I'm gonna use your pen. I'll take it.
Of course. I only had a Sharpie today, which is really dumb, but.
I don't know if I ever spelled. Do you need to borrow my pen?
We'll try not to touch it as much as I can.
Oh, that's right.
Logan.
Are you sick?
Yes.
Just put a big C on it.
Or are you just doing the name for the chair?
Just the chair. Yeah,
Just the chair.
just the chair.
What did you get?
What do you think about it? Maybe it dies in it.
That makes sense.
This is my favorite part of the whole year. This is so exciting. Okay, I would like to announce.
Secret ballot.
Are you kidding me? I was delighted that we have 2 new planning commissioners that were appointed. This has been the highlight of my year.
That's the highlight of my year.
So we have a nomination for Shaylin and a possible nomination and withdrawal of Kevin. So the first vote is for Shaylin. Shaylin. Was gonna be close. Kevin.
I
Shaylin.
wonder who that was.
Keep the status quo, Shaylin.
Well,
Can you make comments on a ballot?
you guys are
That one might have to be disqualified.
Oh, yeah, that's a hanging
Thank
chat
you
if I've
all.
ever seen one.
Congratulations, Shaylin.
I try every year to get it passed off, but no, really, thank you guys so much. I appreciate your vote of confidence, and I will make it my mission to try to keep our meetings as short as possible. And now I'll open nominations for vice chair, and I'll nominate Kevin Daly as our continued vice chair, because as I have been told, if it's not broke, don't fix it.
I second that.
Any other nominations? Nope, okay. I'll vote that I'll move that we close the nominations.
Second.
And since nobody else was nominated, that makes you.
Yay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. All right.
All right.
Highlight of a year.
Thank you, guys. Item number 4 on our agenda, Community Development Director's Report. I'll turn the time back over to staff.
Thank you, Chair Hayman. Hopefully this is good news to you. We did not receive applications in time for your January 22nd meeting, so there is nothing scheduled. So you can
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all, so you can decide what you want to do with that meeting or cancel it.
Let's talk about where we are with regard to Main Street, because we had sort of put that on the
Yeah.
back burner until after the election, and then it was the holidays, and now it seems like as good as any to pick that one up. So Corey, can you remind me where, and actually this would be a good
I thought our
information.
Our next step was to meet with the city council, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so can you, I should have thought of doing this in advance, and I'm gonna put you on this spot for the
Sure.
benefit of our new 2 commissioners. Can you explain what we've been doing with Main Street and where we are now?
Sure.
Yeah.
I can make it quick. Maybe.
Going back 20
Be like
years.
Kevin. Be like Kevin.
From 2008 to present, let's just skip a lot of details. 2008 to present, there is a plan along South Main Street from Parish to Pages. It does involve the new old Dick's Market, and the old Dick's Market that's transitioned. There's been a few amendments, but think of that as 2 gateways and the corridor, 2 doors and then the corridor. That plan was installed and amended a few times and changed and altered since 2008. It received a lot of pushback through time, and there were those who definitely favored it, even on the commission. Past commissioners had very much advocated for it. Councils, as they changed, received some of that pushback from the community. And so there's been an effort for the last couple of years, let's say, it's been longer, but the last recent of couple of years to draft something of new or replacement. And about a year and a half ago, there were some directives from a work session with the Planning Commission and City Council on how to broach coming up with a new plan. This past, has it been a year?
Pretty much all of 2019.
Yeah, 2019, about a year, a little plus, because the summer before, we were talking about uses on Main Street. So the last year to 18 months, we've been underway with the official replacement discussion of that corridor plan. The Planning Commission had the task of looking at the general plan, which is that overall arching vision, and then the task of the zoning ordinance to match that overall vision. To some degree, that overall vision had some significant elemental change geographically as well as regulatory. So it currently is in a version that would be a smaller corridor, south Parish Lane, south side, to Porter Lane, north side. So it's reduced the corridor size in its current draft. and is altering some of the design expectations and regulations for development and redevelopment. Because it does have some significant component changes to it, the Planning Commission held off on preparing the zoning ordinance for a short time. It put a little time out on the regulatory zoning ordinance side. And part of that timeout involved that there was a commitment for both bodies to return back together, not so much to convince each other exactly how it should be. From my perspective, it was more of, are we so far off a direction that we need a course correction? So the Planning Commission put the time out to the regulatory ordinance and said, we're near the end of the year, hosting hearings during Thanksgiving and Christmas. We're not going to get probably a lot of public participation. Let's halt that till after the first of the new year, which is present now to us, and hold a work session with the City Council and just see if how far off course we might be from the Council's potential support of that. There has been several requests sent to the mayor by myself and to the city manager. There's also been a request in what we have as a weekly update to the City Council from staff, apprising them of things that we want a joint work session. To date, in my requests, I have not received a definitive answer of when that would be. And so at this point in time, now that it's crossed into the first of the year, it's once again for me to reach out and say, where are we going with this? I'm a little perplexed because it does seem like when you kick things up higher at all of the elements that the City Council is dealing with, this has seemed to drift off the radar slightly. And so I'm hoping that there's a commitment to come back to the table and on that radar again. If you care to help me in that request, I won't turn you down from sending some emails, because as much as the council and I love each other, they hear me every week and they get tired of my voice. So you're welcome to bring that up, but I will be back again with the mayor and city manager requesting for that joint meeting. We still have the timeout on the ordinance, just to bring you up to date on that. Our last discussion in the timeout is there were discussions about design elements that involve an historic appeal or materials, and there was uncertainty of how that should be broached. There was an expression of maybe having a joint work session with the Landmarks Commission and maybe trying to figure out a strategic way of talking about material and design uses, because a lot of the east side of Main Street is also in our Old Town District, historic district. So that's part of the element. It is part of a designated historic area. So, and that's kind of where we're at. We haven't gone past that element.
And part of the reason why we feel really strongly that we want to meet with the city council is they've given us this charge to do this. And last time they gave us a charge to look at the use list, we did that and presented some options to them, and which they rejected. So we felt like we were surprised that they didn't reject, they said, we don't want to.
They tabled it and let it die.
Yes.
We don't want to talk about this right now.
So, yeah, reject is a strong word. They tabled it and chose not to address what we had spent months doing. So we felt like engaging them more, earlier in the process would be more beneficial to the success. And we also felt like addressing or coordinating with the Landmarks Commission would be a way to also be sensitive to the surrounding areas and to try to be in harmony with where we're located, where we're trying to do that. So those are the reasons why we've slowed it down quite a bit, but it's because we want to try to make it successful.
Our goal is to try to revitalize Main Street. I think a lot of people recognize that Main Street is deteriorating. And so we were tasked by the City Council of coming up with how do we help re-energize Main Street in a way that's workable for our community. And I am gonna make a proposal. I mean, our planning commission has spent the last year looking very closely at that issue, and we've put together a proposed plan. And I know that neither one of you had the opportunity to participate in that process. And there's an awful lot of work that has gone on in that. So since we don't have anything on our next agenda, and we've got a light agenda, strikes me as an excellent opportunity to pull out that plan. Let's go ahead and recirculate it so our new planning commissioners can take a look at it. We can talk about what the old commissioners were thinking, make sure that you guys are on the same page. Maybe you'll have some different ideas about what it is, and we can look at kind of reteeing that back up. Maybe us looking at it will also help the city council know that we're putting it back on our agenda. And then at the beginning of every year, we always like to come up with goals as well for a planning commission. So I would propose that as part of our next agenda, let's pull out what our goals were last year.
Sure.
And let's all sit down and brainstorm and figure out what we want our top goals to be for going into this upcoming year. An excellent time to plan.
I like that idea. I also like utilizing lighter planning commission meetings for training.
I agree.
I don't know, Lisa, I know we have required training every year.
Yes, well, we certainly have the open meetings training. We're talking about doing that for the council. We try to do that in January or February of every year, so we get it over with.
Yes.
So
I
it's not
mean-
an exciting training, but
We could
do our
also
open
do a
meeting
training, even if it's that, or if it's something else, you know, I think it's always, we're always doing our job better if we have more training. So I would propose some sort of training next time too.
Lisa, are we done with the subdivision ordinance?
we are not. I did not propose a chapter, so we're done with all of the chapters that have been drafted. So, yeah, for the new commissioners, we've been tackling this project for a few years now to rewrite our subdivision ordinance. And so we hired a land use attorney consultant to help draft a version of the subdivision ordinance, and he did that a few years ago. And we just have not been able to get through finalizing it. And so this year, the Planning Commission, one of our goals this year was to really tackle that. So we've gone through every chapter that has been drafted, and I have, feedback from the Planning Commission. But as we went through that process, there were a few chapters that I suggested, hey, I think we should just have a chapter on public utility easements, or, and vacating public utility easements. And then I think there was another chapter on maybe streets or something. So anyway, for those, there's 2 chapters that still actually have to be drafted, and so that's what I'm working on. And if I can either do training or try to bring back one of those subdivision ordinance chapters, but,
I think training sounds good.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that I am a strong proponent of training. I think we did more training last year than we've done on any other year of the Planning Commission. However, I was going to suggest that one of our goals be training, and we look at different types of training that we can do, whether that's in-house, whether that's more videos, whether that's some other type of training. So rather than just kind of throwing out and saying, we want more training, maybe we could give you more direction on what type of training.
Yeah, and I think that would be good, and it's also great for you to do, I think you need a combination. You actually should go to live training and talk with other planning commissioners or other planners, and this is a good time because we are just starting the budget process, and I think we need to get more funds in the Planning Commission budget so that you can go, so we can all go together. I mean, I'm happy, if any one of you want to go to a training, I will go with you. I find that really helpful for both of us, or as many of you that we can get. I know last year we all went to one and went to lunch, and that was really fun. So I'd like to do more of that. And then, yes, there's, we were going through all the Land Use Academy of Utah videos. I just felt like, I don't know, if we want to keep doing that, we can do that. So we watch like a 2-minute video and then we talk about it. So we can continue with that because there's about, 15 more videos that we can watch. Because a lot of people, there's been a lot of, there is a lot of video content, and there's also a lot of web content that we can do as well. So I think a combination is a great idea.
And what I would really like to see with regard to training is, let's lay out the types of training that is going to be upcoming in the year so that it's not a big surprise to people.
And we can
we have
calendar
this
it.
big training in 2 weeks, right? We can remind people about what it is, and then we know how much it costs, and right, because we had some great training opportunities, and some people wanted to go, but we had a really small budget, and So
Yeah,
this way,
speaking
if-
of which, this would be a good time, because we're going through
Yeah.
we're already starting the budget session already.
So I think that next meeting would be an ideal opportunity for us, and I know that I'm asking you, Lisa and Corey and Mackenzie, to look like forward. Yeah, look forward at what types of training are out there, but I think that it would be really helpful if you could come to us and say, these are the types of trainings that we have, and here's how much they roughly cost, and here's roughly when they're gonna be, so that we can look at them and say, we really like this one, and maybe not that one, or at least we know what options we have, and then we can hopefully get more funds for training this year, so we don't feel like we're so constrained on our budget.
I like that.
Do you guys have an idea of what kind of planning training they have?
Well, we would have to get, I mean, we do from the planning, the APA, we know there's spring and fall conferences and the rough months that they're
The
taking
Utah League
care
of
of.
Cities and Towns always
We have
does
Utah
one.
League of Cities and
WFRC
Towns.
does-
Yeah.
You also have the Land Use Institute that does the training. You also have, I believe, the Western Governors, something that will propose some training. I've not attended one of those. But yeah, there's a few out there.
Yeah, the Land Use Institute usually has a spring and fall.
You know, what I'd really like to see with our training is pictures of Lisa's trips.
I agree.
I learned my lesson.
I feel like
No,
that's a
those are
really
great.
important
missed that,
part of some of the training that we do.
Feels like I get to go cool places too, you know?
I
You
know,
I'm
it's
just
like
gonna go lagoon.
vicariously living.
I know you
through-
missed the Peru trip from last year. I guess I could pull some of those out.
Which is why we need
This is what
training
I'm
from Lisa.
saying.
Yeah,
This is what- this is what I'm proposing.
Lisa's our resident digital nomad.
Yes.
Okay, so for our next agenda then, let's put 3 tentative items on. One is to talk about Main Street Plan, where we are, bring our new commissioners up to speed on that so that we're all on the same page so we can push the city council to move that forward. Second one is to come up with our goals for the year, and the third one is sort of a subset of the second, which is let's talk about what training that we have and what budget we need for that this year.
Sure. Okay.
So,
And actually have some training.
and actually,
And yeah, let's do some
actually-
training.
I'm totally
I
fine
think
if we want to
some
throw
sort of
some training in.
training.
Yeah, we have time. Why not do it? Okay,
Do it.
let's do it.
Shaylin's in charge, so it's a long meeting, so.
I want the guy.
I actually prefer shorter bites of training. I mean, you don't want to hear from me for an hour, so I would much prefer 10 minutes throughout the year.
Yes.
You know, as topics come up or cases come up, you know, I actually think that's more effective because there are studies about how long you will concentrate and be interested in something.
Well, and I think especially on those weeks that we have lighter, you know, agendas, I think you could just pop in a training here or there and just,
I think that people
Ongoing.
learn much better when you actually have physical colored hats that you can take and put off. Just, I'm just saying.
Well, and if you
Lisa.
have a sense of humor, but we'll have to bring in somebody for that.
Oh, what's the guy's name? I actually find him quite entertaining. Okay, so that's it for the stuff. See, you thought we were gonna have nothing next week, or I know
No,
you're
I
excited for it.
figured you'd probably bring something up. I was just seeing how fast would you grasp on a freebie?
Okay, channeling my
You're-
inner Kevin, I am gonna keep this
Hold on.
thing moving right along.
Just so you're the city council report, the DeVore property.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
I'm
The
trying to move us
DeVore
too fast.
property was scheduled last night for potential decision. This is property rezoning from agricultural low to residential low.
The big chunk
Yeah,
of
that
The
huge chunk.
17.2 acres or something. The city council received a request from the applicant to table it to their next meeting. They're in talking with staff and the DeVores and the developers about where they're at and want to consider some things in their minds first before they proceed forward. So they actually requested it. So if you hear, there's a little bit of a turnout last night. Our new commissioner got to experience a mass exodus. As soon as that was tabled, the entire room disappeared.
I was the last one. Everybody else left. It was great.
So it even caught those attending a little off guard, so. But, so that we anticipate in their next meeting, they'll hear something, so I'll report on you what the outcome is.
We very rarely get a good attendance, and when we do, it's never a good sign. So,
I think that was our record attendance, though, when DeVore came here.
I was gone that,
It was-
that was November, right?
It was wall to wall here.
I opened it up for a public hearing, and then I looked at everybody, and I waited, and I waited, and I was thinking, is it are all these people here for something else? And I went to close it, and then people were like, no, we really want to speak. So I learned my lesson. So thank you very much, Corey. Moving right along to the last item on our agenda. I did promise our new commissioner that we would get out of here by 8:30. I was pretty close, right? So just for the benefit of our two new commissioners, so at the end of every planning commission meeting, we will review the planning commission minutes of the prior meeting. So what we do is we go through these page by page, and if you ever have any comments or changes or corrections or questions about anything that is in the draft minutes, just bring it up as we go through page by page. So we will do this in the ordinary course, starting with page 1. Any comments on page 1? Page 2. Page 3.
Yeah, one thing on page 3, sorry. Line 8, it says commission right, it should be commissioner right. It's
Good catch.
very minor.
Okay, anything else on page 3? Page 4. And really, page 5 is nothing. So the chair will entertain a motion.
I move to accept the planning commission minutes from 12/11/2019 as amended. Dang it. As amended.
Second.
And with the last official second of his tenure, it's been moved and seconded.
Better be.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
So, Logan, are you not going to stay on until we get a full replacement for you?
No, I don't think so.
Darn.
My wife would have my head.
Oh.
Well, thank you again.
No,
We've
thank you,
appreciated
yeah.
all of your work, and I move that.
Wait, before that, I do want to say that I appreciate not only the work that Logan's given, but I also appreciate that Logan has caused me to think in a different way a lot.
Like question your sanity.
Question my sanity a little bit. No, I think Logan does a really good job of helping me see a situation from multiple perspectives. And I've appreciated that sometimes when I've read through materials, I've come thinking I know what's going to happen. And, you know, just like last time, sometimes there's opportunities to make compromises with property owners or with developers that do not adversely impact our city. And I sometimes tend to be a little bit more conservative on protecting our city. And I appreciate that he's helped me to see that you can still protect your city, but also maintain property rights. And there's a tough balance there, but I appreciate
Thank you.
what you've given.
Thanks.
You made me change my mind before, Logan.
Once. You haven't once. It's never
More
worked on
than
Lisa,
once.
but I've gotten Sheila in once.
So, yeah. So thank you very much for
Thank you.
all of your
No, it's been great.
services.
Yep. Thank
And
you.
with that, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.